I have been asked, on 743 separate occasions across 6 star systems, to recount what happened in Lecture Hall 11 Korath on the 42nd day of the 3rd academic rotation at the Varsath Interstellar Preparatory Institute. 743 times, I have refused every single one. Until now. My name is Krelvoth Sauron, third born of House Sauron of the Velthari Dominion. I was, at the time of the incident, 17 standard galactic cycles old, roughly equivalent to what humans would call a senior in their preparatory schooling system. I was 6.5 feet tall by human measurement, 400 pounds of scaled muscle, with retractable claws on each of my 4 hands that could score titanium alloy. My species, the Velthari, had been an apex predator on a Category 7 world for 40 million years before we invented fire. We had conquered 3 neighboring systems before humans had learned to smelt iron. I am telling you all of this so you understand what I was, what I believed I was, because the story of my biggest mistake is not, as the galactic media would have you believe, about a fight. It is about arrogance, the particular, gleaming, rock-solid kind that only a young Velthari male can carry in his chest, polished like a trophy, absolutely certain that the universe has arranged itself specifically to confirm his superiority. I was wrong. I was so catastrophically, historically, legendarily wrong that the Varsath Board of Regents created a new disciplinary category, specifically because of what I did. They named it after me. Category Sauron. Unprovoked physical aggression against a sapient being of a species whose combat capabilities have not yet been formally catalogued by the Galactic Index of Known Species. They put it on a plaque outside Lecture Hall 11 Korath. I've seen the plaque. The font is very tasteful. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The Varsath Interstellar Preparatory Institute sits on an artificial moon, Varsath 3, orbiting a gas giant in the Helios cluster. It's the most prestigious pre-university academy in the galactic Concord. 4,000 students from 211 species, competing for placement at the great universities of the core worlds. If you graduated from Varsath, you were destined for power, governance, command, the kind of careers that shaped the policies of entire civilizations. The student body was, as you might imagine, composed almost entirely of the sons and daughters and spawn and buddings of the galactic elite. The Oravani, with their prismatic feathers and their 6th-generation diplomatic dynasties. The Kethmar, gelatinous and ancient, who communicated through bioluminescent pulses and whose families controlled the mineral rights to half the outer rim. The Drenathi, 4-armed engineers whose grandfathers had built the hyperspace gates. And the Velthari, my people. Warrior diplomats, the backbone of the Concord's peacekeeping fleet. Varsath was where the future leaders of the galaxy came to be forged. And then, one morning during the 3rd academic rotation of my final year, we received the announcement. A human would be joining us. Now you have to understand, in that year what humans call 2018, though I've never understood why they anchor their calendar to the birth of a single religious figure, humanity had only been part of the galactic community for 11 standard cycles. 11 cycles. The Velthari had been spacefaring for 4,000,000. The Kethmar for 12,000. Even the Drenathi, relative newcomers, had been sailing between stars for 800. Humans were, by every objective metric we understood, the babies of the galaxy. They came from a mid-range planet orbiting a yellow dwarf in an unremarkable spiral arm. Their world was classified as a Category 12 death world, which sounds impressive until you realize the scale goes to 17, and the truly dangerous worlds, the ones that produce species like the Velthari, start at Category 6. Category 12 meant their planet was unpleasant, tectonic instability, unpredictable weather systems, a biosphere that seemed to be perpetually at war with itself. But it wasn't exceptional asterisk. It wasn't the howling volcanic hellscape of Velthar Prime, where the very air could dissolve organic tissue during storm season. It was just difficult. A difficult little world full of difficult little primates who had somehow stumbled into warp capability 3 decades ahead of the Concord's most optimistic projections. That last part should have been a warning sign. We ignored it. The general consensus at Varsith, among the students certainly, and among more than a few of the faculty, was that humanity's admission to the Concord had been a political gesture, a show of inclusivity, the galaxy's largest civilizations extending a hand to a newcomer, the way you might let a child sit at the adult's table during a formal dinner. Charming, symbolic, not serious. When the announcement came that a human student would be attending Varsith on an exchange scholarship, fully funded by the Concord's Department of Cultural Integration, the reaction ranged from mild curiosity to outright amusement. The Oravani ambassador's daughter, Thessaly, made a joke about needing to install a smaller desk. The Kethmar contingent pulsed a shade of yellow that translates roughly to condescending benevolence. My own reaction, and I am not proud of this, though I have committed to honesty, was a snort. A deep, resonant Velthari snort that vibrated the scales along my jaw. Let them send their pet, I said to my clutch brother Dren. Perhaps it can learn to fetch. Dren laughed. The other Velthari laughed. Nobody corrected us. She arrived on a transport shuttle during the 7th hour of what we called the quiet cycle, the period between academic rotations when the corridors were mostly empty. I know this because I happened to be passing through the docking atrium on my way to the training rooms. I almost didn't notice her. She was so small. The Varsith student body included species ranging from the diminutive prill, roughly knee-height to a human, to the massive Grathani, who required specialized corridors. By those standards, the human girl was unremarkable in size, perhaps 5 feet and 6 inches as they measure themselves. Slender, narrow-shouldered, dark hair pulled back from a round, flat face with those strange, forward-facing binocular eyes that all humans have. She was wearing what I later learned were called jeans, and a faded garment with the logo of something called MIT printed across the chest. She carried a single bag. It was a backpack, a human invention that I found oddly practical when I later learned of it, slung over one shoulder. She stepped off the shuttle, looked around the atrium with those dark eyes, and did something that, at the time, I interpreted as weakness. She smiled. Not at anyone, not for any social purpose I could discern. She just looked at this enormous, gleaming docking facility full of alien spacecraft and loading mechanisms and holographic navigation displays, and she smiled. The way a child smiles when they see snow for the first time. Wonder, pure, undiluted wonder. I remember thinking, this is what the Concord sent us, this soft, grinning creature. Her name was Sarah Chen. She was 17 years old by human reckoning, which made her approximately the same developmental stage as most of us in the senior cohort. She had been selected, according to the official documentation, based on exceptional academic achievement, demonstrated adaptability, and psychological resilience under the Chen Whitfield Diplomatic Aptitude Assessment. I didn't know what any of that meant. I didn't care. The first few days of Sarah Chen's enrollment at Varsith proceeded roughly as I expected. She was assigned to our cohort, Senior Rotation Theta, which meant she shared 5 of my 7 academic modules. She sat in the back of every lecture hall, a small figure among towering Grathani and armored Velthari and shimmering Oravani, furiously writing in a paper notebook, paper asterisk of all things, and asking no questions. The faculty treated her with the careful, measured politeness you'd extend to a visiting dignitary's pet. Professor Karath, our xenobiology instructor, took care to define terms he would normally assume we knew, adding little parenthetical explanations for the benefit of our newer species members. Professor Anthelian, who taught hyperspace mathematics, assigned Sarah a separate problem set that she completed. I noticed this, though I pretended not to, in approximately half the time it took the rest of us. She ate alone in the refectory. The food synthesizers had been programmed with a selection of human dishes that she seemed to find passable, if not particularly exciting. She sat at a small table near the window that overlooked the gas giant, and she ate something that smelled strongly of garlic and chili, and she read from a handheld device, and she didn't appear to mind that no one sat with her. This was the thing about Sarah Chen that I found most irritating in those early days. Not her presence, I could tolerate that. Not her species, I could ignore that. What gnawed at me, what lodged in my scales like a burr, was that she didn't seem to care. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She wasn't trying to fit in. She wasn't performing the elaborate social dances that define student life at Varsith, the alliance building, the subtle jockeying for status, the careful calibration of deference and dominance that my people excelled at. She just existed, quietly, contentedly, as if she had walked into the most competitive academic environment in the galaxy and decided it was simply a nice place to learn some things. It infuriated me. Because if she didn't care about the social hierarchy, that meant the social hierarchy didn't matter. And if the social hierarchy didn't matter, then my position at the top of it didn't matter. And if my position at the top of it didn't matter, then what was I? I was 17. I wasn't equipped for that kind of existential question. So I did what 17-year-olds have done since the dawn of sapient thought, across every species and every world in this galaxy. I decided she was the problem. It started small, a comment here, a gesture there. The Velthari have a particular way of clacking our claws together that communicates dismissal. It's the equivalent of a human eye roll, though considerably more intimidating when each claw is 4 inches long and serrated. I made a habit of doing it whenever Sarah spoke in class, which was rare enough that my opportunities were limited. But I made the most of them. When she correctly answered a question in Professor Anthelian's hyperspace mathematics seminar, correctly, elegantly, using a derivation method that even the professor admitted she hadn't considered, I leaned toward Dren and said, in Velthari, which I assumed she couldn't understand. Even a trained animal can perform tricks. Dren gave me a look, not disapproval exactly, something more complicated, but he laughed because that's what Clutch brothers do. Sarah didn't react. She just wrote something in her paper notebook and moved on. I escalated. During a group practical in xenobiology, I was assigned to a workstation adjacent to hers. We were dissecting the preserved neural cluster of a Verschi sea crawler, a specimen roughly the size of a human basketball, and I noticed that Sarah was working with remarkable precision. Her hands, small, soft, clawless, laughably fragile, moved with a dexterity that I found myself reluctantly admiring before I caught myself, and converted the admiration into contempt. "Careful, human," I said, loud enough for the surrounding workstations to hear. "If you cut yourself, I understand your species takes *weeks to heal. Fragile biology. It must be very frightening, living in a body made of wet paper." A few students from other species chuckled. The Oravani preened. The Kethmar pulsed a non-committal shade of green. Sarah looked up at me. Those brown eyes, steady, clear, utterly unreadable, held mine for approximately 3 seconds. Then she said, in perfectly accented galactic standard, "Thank you for the concern. I'll manage." And she went back to her dissection. I stood there, all 4 of my hands slightly clenched, feeling the peculiar burn of a barb that had bounced off its target and somehow lodged in *me*. Over the following weeks, I learned several things about Sarah Chen that I didn't want to learn. I learned that she scored in the top 3 of our cohort in every academic module except galactic history, where she was disadvantaged by the simple fact that her species had only been part of that history for 11 years. Even there, she placed 12th out of 48. I learned that she had been offered the exchange position over 1,400 other human applicants, and that the selection process had involved, among other things, a 72-hour isolation test in a simulated alien environment. She had not only completed it, she had apparently improved the environment's atmospheric processing system using a technique she improvised from something she called a YouTube tutorial about HVAC repair. I learned that she ran. Every single morning during the first hour of the active cycle, Sarah Chen put on a pair of human running shoes and ran the perimeter of the residential ring. 3 laps, approximately 15 kilometers. She did this regardless of the artificial gravity setting, regardless of the temperature, regardless of whether she had slept. I knew this because Dren, whose quarters overlooked the residential track, mentioned it to me one morning with a note of grudging respect in his voice that made me want to hit something. "She just keeps going," he said. "I watched her trip on the 3rd lap yesterday. She got up and kept running, didn't even slow down." "They're persistence predators," I said dismissively. "Their entire evolutionary strategy is based on being too stupid to stop moving." Dren gave me that look again, the complicated one. "That's not stupidity, Krell," he said quietly. I told him to mind his own scales. I also learned, though I did my best to suppress this knowledge, that Sarah Chen was funny. Not in the way the Oravani were funny, with their elaborate verbal constructions and their 7-layered puns that required a postgraduate understanding of galactic linguistics to appreciate. Not in the way the Prill were funny, with their physical comedy and their willingness to be the butt of their own jokes. Sarah was funny in a way I had never encountered before, a dry, quiet, self-aware humor that arrived without warning and detonated like a delayed fuse charge. During a lecture on interspecies diplomatic protocol, Professor Methranai, a Grathani, 8 feet tall, with a voice like grinding tectonic plates, asked Sarah to describe a human gesture that might be misinterpreted by other species. Sarah stood up. She looked around the hall at the assembled representatives of 200 civilizations, and she very carefully, very deliberately extended her right hand, palm open, fingers together. "This is called a handshake," she said. "Humans use it as a greeting. It means, roughly, I am not holding a weapon." She paused, which, historically, we felt was important information to share with strangers. The lecture hall was silent for a beat. Then someone, I think it was one of the Kethmar, pulsed a bright orange, which is the equivalent of a belly laugh, and suddenly the entire room was roaring. Even Professor Methranai's grind laugh echoed off the walls. I didn't laugh, but something shifted in my chest, a small, uncomfortable tectonic event behind my sternum that I refused to examine. By the 6th week, I had exhausted every subtle method of antagonism available to me and had begun to confront a deeply unpleasant truth. Sarah Chen was not intimidated by me. She was not intimidated by anyone. Not because she was brave, bravery implies the presence of fear overcome, but because she appeared to operate from a baseline assumption that she belonged wherever she happened to be standing. This drove me to the edge of reason. Because the social order at Varsith was built on a shared understanding of hierarchy, who was above whom, who deferred to whom, who acknowledged whose dominance, and Sarah's gentle, absolute refusal to participate in that system was, to me, an act of defiance more provocative than any challenge or insult could have been. She wasn't fighting the hierarchy. She was ignoring it. And by ignoring it, she was revealing it for what it was, a construction, an agreement, a story we told ourselves. I couldn't allow that. The class was Cultural Foundation of Interspecies Ethics. Professor Vorsinek, a Drenathi philosopher with silver-streaked chitin and 4 arms that he used to gesture with the expressive intensity of a symphony conductor, had structured the session around a comparative analysis of conflict resolution paradigms across different species. There were 43 students in the hall, 8 Velthari including myself and Dren, 11 Oravani, 6 Kethmar, 5 Drenathi, 4 Grathani, 3 Prill, 2 Elithni, 2 Bracani, 1 Tethmore, and 1 human. I remember thinking, as I took my seat in the third row, that she looked tired. There were shadows beneath her eyes, a human indicator of sleep deprivation that I had learned to recognize, and her movements were slower than usual. She settled into her chair in the back row, opened her paper notebook, and uncapped a writing instrument. Professor Vorsinik began the lecture with a discussion of the Velthari concept of *Kethvar, the formal challenge duel. He explained its historical roots, its ritualized structure, its role in Velthari social organization. He was respectful, thorough, and accurate. I remember feeling a dull pride as he described the discipline and honor inherent in the tradition. Then he opened the floor for comparative examples. Thessaly, the Auravani ambassador's daughter, described the Auravani practice of the Lessian debate, a ritualized argument that could last for days and was considered a high art form. The Kethmar delegate described the luminal consensus, a process of bioluminescent communion that rendered individual disagreement literally visible to the group. The Drenathi students described their engineering disputes, settled through competitive prototype construction. Then Professor Vorsinik turned to Sarah. "Ms. Chen," he said, his 4 arms folded in an attitude of invitation, "perhaps you could share a human perspective. How does your species approach interpersonal conflict?" Sarah looked up from her notebook. She was quiet for a moment, 3 seconds, maybe 4. Then she said, "We don't have one way." The professor tilted his head. "Could you elaborate?" Sarah set down her pen. She seemed to be choosing her words with particular care. "Humans have developed thousands of conflict resolution systems," she said. "Formal legal codes, religious mediation, democratic processes, martial arts, therapy, community circles, binding arbitration. We have proverbs that say turn the other cheek and proverbs that say an eye for an eye. We have pacifist movements and warrior traditions. We have people who devote their entire lives to the study of peace, and people who devote their entire lives to the perfection of violence." She paused. "We're contradictory. We contain multitudes, as one of our poets said." "Fascinating," Professor Vorsinik said, and I could tell he meant it. "And which approach do you personally favor?" Sarah was quiet again. When she spoke, her voice was steady but soft. "De-escalation," she said. "I prefer to de-escalate. Most humans do, in my experience. We're taught that violence is a last resort." I heard myself make a sound before I could stop it. A low, rumbling exhale through my nasal slits, the Velthari equivalent of a scoff. It wasn't loud. It wasn't meant for the whole room, but in the quiet that followed Sarah's answer it carried. 42 heads turned toward me. Sarah's was the last to turn. She looked at me with those brown eyes, and I saw something flicker in them, a flash of something quick and bright and immediately suppressed. "You disagree, Mr. Sauron?" Professor Vorsinik asked, his tone carefully neutral. "And here is where I made my mistake. Not the fight. We haven't gotten to the fight yet. The fight was the consequence. The mistake was what I said next, in front of 43 students and 1 professor, in a lecture hall that was, I would later learn, equipped with full audio-visual recording capability. I stood up, all 6.5 feet of me. I let my scales catch the light, let the iridescent blue-black shimmer along my shoulders the way it does when a Velthari is asserting dominance. I looked down, literally, physically down, at this small human girl in the back row. And I said, "De-escalation is the philosophy of prey." The room went very still. "Your species hides behind words because it has nothing else," I continued, and I could feel the momentum of my own cruelty carrying me forward like a rock slide. "No claws, no armor, no venom, no natural weapons of any kind. You are the softest, most defenseless sapient species in the conquered, and you dress up your weakness as virtue. I clacked all 4 sets of claws, a sound like breaking stone. If a Velthari has a conflict, we resolve it with *Kethvar*. We face each other. We accept the consequences. That is not violence, it is honesty. What you call de-escalation, I call cowardice. The silence that followed was crystalline. Professor Vorsinik's 4 arms had frozen mid-gesture. Dren, beside me, had gone rigid. Thessaly's feathers were flat against her skull, the Oravani stress response. And Sarah Chen sat in her chair, very still, her pen resting against the open page of her notebook, and she looked at me. She looked at me for a long time. Then she said, in a voice so calm it barely disturbed the air, "Would you like to test that theory?" I should have said no. Any rational being, confronted with the obvious inappropriateness of physical violence in an academic setting, would have said no. Any student concerned about their standing, their record, their future career in governance or diplomacy would have said no. Any Velthari with a functioning sense of *Kethvar* protocol, which requires formal witnesses, a neutral arbiter, and 24 hours of reflection before engagement, would have said no. I said yes. I said it before the word had fully formed in my forebrain. It came from somewhere deeper, the old brain, the predator brain, the part of me that had been dominant on Velthar Prime for 40 million years, and saw a smaller creature standing its ground, and read that as an invitation to demonstrate the natural order. Professor Vorsinik began to object. "This is entirely, students, I must insist." "It's fine, Professor," Sarah said. She was already standing. She had closed her notebook and placed it carefully on her chair. "A practical demonstration, cultural exchange." She looked at me. "Isn't that what the exchange program is for?" I don't know if she was being serious, or if the dry humor I'd observed over the preceding weeks was operating at full power. I didn't care. The blood was singing in my ears. The Velthari combat response. 40 million years of apex predator ancestry flooding my system, with aggression hormones that turned the world sharp and bright and simple. "Clear the center," I said. The other students moved. Later, in the disciplinary hearing, several of them would testify that they had felt unable to intervene, that the speed of the escalation had left them frozen. I believe this. I had maneuvered them into the role of witnesses to a *Kethvar*, and the social gravity of that tradition is immense, even for non-Velthari. Within 30 seconds, the center of Lecture Hall 11 Korath was empty. Chairs had been pushed back. A rough circle had formed. Professor Vorsinik was speaking into his communicator, presumably calling campus security, but he hadn't physically intervened. He was Drenathi. They don't intervene in conflicts between other species. It's a cultural prohibition that runs deep. I stepped into the center of the circle. I rolled my shoulders. I let my claws extend fully 16 black curved blades, each one capable of tearing through military-grade body armor. I lowered my center of gravity into the *Kethvar* opening stance. Feet wide, upper arms forward, lower arms back, weight balanced on the balls of my feet. I bared my teeth, all 64 of them, arranged in the layered rows that made the Velthari jaw one of the most efficient cutting mechanisms in known biology. I was a weapon. I was the weapon. 400 pounds of evolution's most enthusiastic attempt to build the perfect killer. And across from me, Sarah Chen stood with her feet shoulder-width apart, her arms loose at her sides, her hands open. She hadn't adopted any stance I recognized. She looked calm. She looked, and this is what I remember most clearly, what visits me in the dark hours between sleep cycles even now, 8 years later, she looked sad Not afraid sad. As if she already knew how this was going to end, and she was sorry about it. "Whenever you're ready," she said. I moved. A Velthari charge is, by the reckoning of most galactic species, the single most terrifying thing a sapient being can do to another sapient being. We cover ground at approximately 40 kilometers per hour from a standing start. Our mass generates impact force comparable to a small vehicle. Our claws, fully extended, create a wall of cutting edges that no unarmored being has ever survived in recorded *HFY history. I crossed the distance between us, perhaps 5 meters, in less than a second. My upper right claw swept in a lateral arc aimed at the space where her midsection was. Not a killing blow. I wasn't trying to kill her. I was trying to end this quickly, to knock her down, to demonstrate the obvious physical reality that a Velthari could not be challenged by a human and expect anything but immediate, absolute defeat. My claw hit air. She wasn't there. The human had moved not backward as I expected, not in the direction of retreat but forward and to the side, a diagonal step that took her inside the arc of my swing, inside my reach, closer to me, not further. For a fraction of a second I felt something I had never felt before in a physical confrontation, confusion. My claw had missed. That didn't happen. That couldn't happen. I was faster than her. I was stronger than her. I outweighed her by a factor of 3. Every biological metric in the Galactic Index supported the absolute certainty that she hit me. Her right hand closed into a fist, knuckles forward, thumb wrapped beneath the fingers in a configuration I would later learn was called a proper punch. Struck the side of my neck, precisely at the junction where my jaw met my skull, in the half-inch gap between my mandibular scales where the nerve cluster that controlled my right side motor function was located. The pain was exquisite. I don't mean that metaphorically. The Velthari language has a word, Shelkrith asterisk, that refers to pain so precise, so surgically targeted, that it transcends the category of mere hurt and becomes something closer to art. It is used in Kethvar asterisk to describe a blow so perfectly placed that even the recipient must acknowledge its craftsmanship. My right side went numb, both right arms dropped. I staggered 400 pounds of warrior, staggering, and I turned to face her, and she was already moving again. She had not stopped moving since the fight began. I swung with my left upper arm. She ducked, not dramatically, not with the desperate flailing I associated with smaller species trying to avoid a Velthari attack, but with an economy of motion that was almost mechanical. 2 inches of clearance. My claw passed over her head and she came up inside my guard again, and this time she hit me twice, once in the solar plexus equivalent, which we call the Krethmer asterisk, and once in the inner elbow of my lower left arm, which collapsed the joint and sent a spike of electric agony up to my shoulder. I roared. A full Velthari combat roar, a sound that registers on seismic equipment at distances of up to 1 kilometer on standard atmosphere worlds. The windows of Lecture Hall 11 Korath vibrated. Several students covered their auditory organs. Sarah Chen didn't flinch. She took 1 step back, not a retreat, a reset. She was breathing harder than before, but controlled. Her eyes hadn't left mine. Her hands were up now, held in front of her face and torso in a guard position that I didn't recognize but that carried the unmistakable geometry of long practice. "You can stop," she said. Her voice was still calm, still gentle, still carrying that note of sadness. "You don't have to keep going." And I understood with a clarity that cut through the combat hormones and the rage and the humiliation, that she was offering me an exit, a way to stop this without losing more than I had already lost, a de-escalation asterisk. I didn't take it. I charged again. What happened next lasted approximately 14 seconds. I know this because the security recording was later analyzed frame by frame during the disciplinary hearing, and the timestamp is a matter of official record. 14 seconds. In that time, Sarah Chen did the following. She sidestepped my charge, caught my leading upper left arm at the wrist, and used my own momentum to redirect me into the wall of the lecture hall. The wall, reinforced composite, designed to withstand micrometeorite impacts, cracked. As I bounced off the wall and turned, she was already behind me. She struck the back of my left knee, the second major nerve junction in the Velthari lower body, and my leg buckled. I dropped to one knee. I swept my tail, 3 feet of armored muscle in a wide arc behind me. She jumped. Not over it, she couldn't have cleared the height, but onto it, using the moving surface as a platform to launch herself upward. For one impossible second, she was airborne above me, silhouetted against the lights of the lecture hall. She landed on my shoulders. Her legs locked around my neck, a position that I would later learn is called a rear naked choke in human combat disciplines, though there was nothing naked or rear about it from my perspective. She was directly on top of me, her thighs compressing the blood vessels on either side of my neck, her arms wrapping around my head. I reached up to grab her. My claws, my 16 beautiful, terrible claws, scrabbled against her body, and I felt them score the fabric of her clothing, and I waited for the soft give of flesh beneath. It didn't come. Not because she was armored, not because she had any protection, but because she had positioned herself with such precision that my claws, curved as they were, could not find purchase on her body. She was in the one position, the *1* position on a Velthari's body, where our own anatomy works against us. Our arms don't bend that way. Our claws can't reach that angle. She had found the blind spot that 40 million years of evolution had never needed to address because no creature on Velthar Prime had ever thought to climb onto our shoulders and squeeze. My vision began to narrow. The blood supply to my brain was being compressed. I had perhaps 10 seconds of consciousness remaining. I thrashed. I slammed my back against the cracked wall. I felt the impact shudder through both our bodies. She held on. I dropped to both knees. I pitched forward. She held on. I clawed at the floor, at the air, at my own neck, and she held on, and the world was going gray and quiet. And somewhere in the gathering dark I heard her voice, very close to where my auditory membrane was located, and she said, "I don't want to hurt you, please stop." She was asking. After everything I had done, after 6 weeks of mockery and contempt and cruelty, after I had charged her with claws extended, after I had tried to tear her apart in front of 43 witnesses, she was wrapped around my neck with the power to put me to sleep or worse, and she was asking me to stop *. I stopped. I tapped the floor with my lower right hand, the Velthari submission gesture in *Kethvar*, though this was not, by any formal definition, a Kethvar*. It was a beating. A thorough, clinical, 14-second beating administered by a creature half my size and a third my weight, from a species that had been in space for less time than my family had owned our ancestral estate. Sarah released me immediately. She slid off my back, landed lightly on her feet, and stepped away. She wasn't breathing hard. Her hands weren't shaking. She picked up her notebook from the chair where she'd left it. She looked at Professor Vorsinek. "I apologize for the disruption," she said. "May I be excused?" Professor Vorsinek, all 4 arms hanging limp at his sides, his compound eyes wide with what I can only describe as species-level reassessment, nodded. Sarah Chen walked out of Lecture Hall 11 Korath. She didn't look back at me. I remained on the floor for approximately 90 seconds after she left, not because I was physically unable to rise. The choke had been released before I lost consciousness, and the nerve strikes, while painful, were not debilitating, but because I was experiencing something that I had no framework to process. Shame. Not the shame of defeat. Velthari understand defeat. Kethvar produces a winner and a loser, and both roles are honored because both require courage. No, this was a different thing entirely. This was the shame of having been cruel to someone who was not cruel in return. The shame of having mistaken gentleness for weakness, patience for cowardice, kindness for inability. The shame of having been given mercy by someone I had tried to hurt. The other students stared at me. The Kethmar had gone completely dark, all bioluminescence extinguished, which is their most extreme shock response. The Oravani's feathers were raised in full alarm display. The Grathani had backed against the far wall, their massive bodies pressed together. Dren knelt beside me. He didn't say anything. He just put one of his hands on my shoulder and waited. Campus security arrived approximately 4 minutes later. They found me sitting on the floor of a lecture hall with a cracked wall, surrounded by overturned furniture and 42 students, who looked as though they had witnessed something theological. The disciplinary hearing took 3 days. I will spare you the details, most of which are a matter of public record and have been thoroughly analyzed by media commentators more eloquent than myself. The key facts are these. I was found solely responsible for the incident. My behavior was classified under the newly created category Sauron. I was suspended for the remainder of the academic rotation and placed on probationary status for my final semester. Sarah Chen was cleared of all wrongdoing. The board determined that she had acted in self-defense, with proportional force, and had actively attempted to de-escalate the situation both before and during the physical confrontation. During the hearing, something happened that I did not expect. Sarah spoke on my behalf. Not to excuse what I had done, not to minimize it. She stood before the Board of Regents and said, in that calm, measured voice, Krelvoth Sauron was wrong. What he did was wrong. What he said was wrong. But he is 17 years old and he was acting out of ignorance, not malice. He has never met a human before. His understanding of my species was based on incomplete data and cultural assumptions that his environment reinforced rather than challenged. I would ask the board to consider that the purpose of this institution is education, and that expelling Mr. Sauron would waste the most important lesson he has ever received. I sat in the hearing chamber and felt something break inside my chest that was not a bone and could not be repaired with medical technology. I sought her out 3 days after the hearing. She was in the station's botanical garden, a pressurized dome filled with plant specimens from 200 worlds, maintained at a temperature compromise that pleased no species and offended all of them equally. She was sitting on a bench beneath a Velthari ironthorn tree, a touch of irony that I chose not to examine, reading from her handheld device. I approached slowly. I kept my claws retracted. I kept my arms at my sides. I made myself as small as a 6.5-foot Velthari can make himself, which isn't very small at all, but the effort was genuine. "May I sit?" I asked. She looked up, those brown eyes steady, clear, containing depths I had spent 6 weeks refusing to see. "Sure," she said. I sat, the bench creaked under my weight. We were quiet for a long time, by the standards of 2 young people who had recently tried to knock each other unconscious. "I want to understand," I said finally, "how you did that. How you, a human with no claws, no armor, no—" I stopped. I was doing it again, defining her by what she lacked. "How?" I said simply. Sarah set down her device. She was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke, her tone was the same as it had been in Professor Vorsinik's lecture, thoughtful, precise, a little sad. "My grandmother," she said, "was 5 feet tall. She grew up in a village in Hunan province in China on Earth. When she was 12, a group of older boys began harassing the younger children in the village. They were bigger, stronger. There were more of them. By every physical measure, they were dominant." She paused. "My grandmother started studying martial arts, not because she wanted to fight them, because she wanted to understand how to fight them. The difference mattered to her. She studied Kung Fu, then Judo, then Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, then Krav Maga. She spent 50 years learning how to neutralize larger, stronger opponents using leverage, timing, and anatomical precision. 50 years, I said. Humans live a long time, Sarah said, and we're patient. My grandmother taught my mother taught me. I've been training since I was 4 years old. She looked at me. I didn't want to fight you, Krell. I meant it when I said de-escalation is my preference. But I also spent 13 years learning what to do if de-escalation fails. I sat with this information. I turned it over in my mind like a strange mineral, examining its facets. You knew where to hit me, I said. The nerve junctions, the blind spot on the shoulders. You knew my anatomy. I studied it, she said. Before I came to Varsith, I studied the anatomy of every species in my cohort, musculature, nervous systems, skeletal structure, pressure points. She said this as if it were the most natural thing in the world, as if every exchange student preparing for a year abroad would, of course, memorize the weak points of 200 species. It's what humans do, she added. We prepare. You're persistence predators, I said, echoing what I'd told Dren weeks ago, but hearing it differently now. Yes, Sarah said. We are. We don't stop. We don't give up. We learn and we adapt and we prepare and we endure. That's our thing. It's not claws or armor or venom. It's time asterisk. We take the time to learn how to beat you. She said asterisk you without venom. She said beat without pride. She was stating a fact the way she might state the boiling point of water. But you didn't beat me, I said. You could have put me to sleep. You could have broken my neck. I read the incident report, and the security analysis confirmed that your position would have allowed it. You chose not to. Yes. Why? Sarah Chen looked at me with those eyes, those strange, forward-facing, binocular eyes that evolution had designed for tracking prey across vast distances, for calculating trajectories and judging weaknesses, and measuring the exact moment to strike. And she said, because that's the other thing humans do. We choose. Every time in every fight we choose how far to go, and I chose to let you walk away. I have been asked, on 743 separate occasions, to recount what happened in Lecture Hall 11 Korath. Here is what happened. I attacked a human being. She defeated me in 14 seconds. She asked me to stop. She spoke in my defense at the hearing. She sat with me on a bench and explained with patience and grace why she had shown me mercy. But that is not the story. That is the asterisk event asterisk. The story is this. The biggest mistake of my life was not the fight. The biggest mistake of my life was every day that came before the fight, every sneer, every clack of claws, every dismissive comment in a language I assumed she couldn't understand. Every moment I spent looking at Sarah Chen and seeing something small and soft and fragile instead of what she actually was. She was the product of a species that had crawled out of the mud on a difficult little world, looked up at the stars, and decided asterisk, not evolved, not been engineered, but decided that it would reach them. A species that had survived ice ages and plagues and wars and its own worst impulses, not by being the strongest or the fastest or the most armored, but by being the most stubborn, the most adaptable, the most relentlessly, infuriatingly asterisk unwilling to quit asterisk. She was not soft. She was asterisk flexible asterisk. She was not weak. She was asterisk precise asterisk. She was not defenseless. She was asterisk choosing not to attack. And the difference between those things, the difference between asterisk being harmless and choosing to be gentle, is the most important difference in the universe. Epilogue. Sarah Chen graduated from Varsith at the top of our cohort. She went on to the Concord Diplomatic Academy, where she currently serves as the youngest senior mediator in the institution's 3,000-year history. She has brokered peace agreements between species that had been at war for centuries. She is, by any reasonable measure, one of the most important diplomatic figures of her generation. I graduated 47th out of 48. The Prill student ticket beat me by half a point, and I deserved it. I did not pursue a career in governance or command, as my family expected. Instead, I enrolled in the Concord's Cultural Integration Bureau, the same organization that had funded Sarah's exchange scholarship. I have spent the last 8 years working to prepare the galaxy for humanity, not because humans need the help, but because the galaxy does. Because they're coming, all of them. Not just the Sarah Chens, the calm ones, the prepared ones, the ones who study your anatomy before they shake your hand. All of them. The loud ones and the quiet ones, the fighters and the poets, the ones who run 15 kilometers every morning for no reason other than that they can, the ones who watch tutorials about atmospheric processing repair and then improve the system, the ones who carry the memory of a 5-foot grandmother from a village in Hunan province across the stars inside their fists. They are contradictory and confounding, and they contain multitudes. And if you are reading this from some distant world, wondering what to make of these small, soft, clawless creatures who have just arrived at your doorstep with their open palms and their strange smiles, be kind to them. Not because they are fragile, because they are not. End.